old school Undertaker. He never envisioned me leaving, retiring. If it would have been up to him, I'd still be out there, at least choke slamming somebody.
Someone once said he had no talent. Those 3 words were aimed at one of the most powerful men in professional wrestling, and the man who heard them did not forget. He never forgot anything. He never let anything go. Because in his world, disrespect was not just an insult, it was a crime, and he was the judge. If you want to see where this story's going, smash that hype button right now and give this video some hype. You are going to need to be here for all of it. This is the story of 6 people who made that mistake. 6 people who looked at The Undertaker and decided the rules did not apply to them. Some were world champions. Some were global icons. One was the most feared fighter on the planet. And every single one of them found out the hard way that in this locker room, there was no second chance. But to understand what disrespect even means in this world, you have to go to one night, one moment, one match that changed everything. WrestleMania 30, New Orleans, April 2014. The Superdome was packed. The crowd was electric. And The Undertaker walked through the curtain carrying his streak. 21 wins, 0 losses, 21 WrestleMania matches without a single defeat. That streak was not just a record, it was a religion. Fans had grown up believing it would never end. Veterans in the back believed it was untouchable. The streak was bigger than any title, bigger than any rivalry. It was The Undertaker himself, made real in numbers. Brock Lesnar was waiting in that ring. The 2 men fought, and within the first few minutes, something went terribly wrong. The Undertaker suffered a severe concussion early in the match. He has no memory of the night after 3:30 p.m. that afternoon. He was fighting on instinct alone. He was surviving. And then the 3 count happened. The arena went silent, a silence you could feel in your chest. Fans sat with their mouths open. Children cried. Grown men stared at the screen in disbelief. The streak was over. 21-0 was gone in a single night. One man lay on the mat with no memory of how he got there. The other stood over him as the winner. Vince McMahon had made the call that very day. The Undertaker had asked him directly, "Are you sure?" And Vince had said yes. So The Undertaker did what he always did. He did business. He put the company first, even when it cost him everything. That was who this man was. That was what he stood for. And that is what makes the 6 stories you're about to hear so important. Because those 6 people did not just disrespect a man, they disrespected a code, a way of life, a set of rules that kept professional wrestling alive. This is not a simple list. This is a history lesson. This is the story of what happens when ego, arrogance, and carelessness collide with the one man in wrestling who would not let any of it slide. Starting from number 6 and counting down to the most shocking case of all, here is every person who dared to disrespect The Undertaker. Professional wrestling lives in 2 worlds at once. The first world is the one you see on television. The storylines, the feuds, the finishes. All of it planned. All of it worked out in advance. The characters are real, but the results are predetermined. Every winner is chosen before the bell rings. The second world is the one behind the curtain. And that world has its own rules, its own language, its own system of punishment. And for decades, it had its own judge. That judge was The Undertaker. In the professional wrestling locker room, there is a system known as Wrestler's Court. It has no written laws. It has no official rule book. But every wrestler who ever worked for WWE knew it was real. If you broke the unspoken rules of the locker room, you could be summoned, and The Undertaker would be sitting at the head of that table. The charges could be anything. You might be called out for stealing a veteran's finishing move, for sitting in the front of the bus before you had earned that right, for showing a lack of respect to the people who had been in the business longer than you, for being lazy in the ring when you had been given every physical gift in the world. The list of offenses was as long as the locker room wanted it to be. The sentences were just as varied. Sometimes you had to buy beer and food for the veterans. Sometimes you were ignored by the entire locker room. Sometimes you found your creative ideas going nowhere fast. Sometimes you got hit harder in the ring than the script called for. And sometimes the consequences followed you for years. This was not a democracy, it was a hierarchy, and The Undertaker stood at the very top of it. Look at what happened to Enzo Amore as a modern example. Amore was fired by Dusty Rhodes after passing gas during a promo class. That single act showed a fundamental lack of basic respect for the learning environment. Management stepped in. Triple H rehired him, but the locker room did not move on as quickly. The heat followed him everywhere he went. He went through a long losing streak. His creative direction dried up. Eventually, he left the company altogether. His contract meant nothing. The judgment of the locker room meant everything. That was the power of the system The Undertaker maintained. Even giants were not safe from it. The Big Show was called out for being lazy in matches despite his enormous physical gifts. The Undertaker made it clear that size alone was not enough. You had to work. You had to earn your place every single night. No exceptions for the big men. Melina found out that the system applied across the entire roster. Perceived arrogance in the backstage area led to social isolation. The conscience of WWE did not limit his reach to one dressing room. Baron Corbin made inappropriate comments in backstage meetings and was required to pay his dues the traditional way. No shortcuts, no exceptions, not for anyone. This was the environment that every person on this list chose to challenge. Starting from number 6, here is what each of them did, how The Undertaker responded, and what it all revealed about a locker room that ran not on fairness, but on fear. Number 6, Hulk Hogan. This one starts with a lie, not a small one, not the kind you explain away with time. A lie told by the biggest star in professional wrestling to protect his own legacy at the direct expense of someone else's career. A cold, calculated act of political manipulation dressed up as an injury claim. The year was 1991, Survivor Series. The Undertaker was a rapidly rising star. He was powerful and unique and unlike anything the company had seen before. Management decided the time was right. The plan was for him to win the WWE Championship by defeating Hulk Hogan, a move designed to establish the dead man as a genuine top-level threat. During the match, Ric Flair interfered and slid a chair into the ring. The Undertaker used that chair to execute his tombstone piledriver on Hogan. It looked dramatic, the kind of moment that would define a championship reign, and then Hogan claimed he had been dropped too hard. He told people that Mark Calloway had caused a legitimate neck injury during the move. In 1991, that was one of the most damaging things you could say about a young wrestler. If the biggest star in the company calls you unsafe, your career can be finished before it properly begins. The accusation carries enormous weight in a world built on physical trust. Calloway carried that guilt for years. He genuinely believed he had hurt the man. He replayed it in his mind. He sat with that weight. It was only much later, after reviewing the high-definition replay of the match, that the truth finally became clear. Hogan's head had been inches away from the chair. There was no contact. The injury was completely fabricated. Hogan had made the claim to engineer a title change in his favor. Just 6 days later, at this Tuesday in Texas, Hogan won back the championship. Think about what that means. A young wrestler given a major push by management wins the most important prize in the company, and the man he beats invents an injury to get it back within a week. The Undertaker's first championship reign lasted less than 7 days because of a deliberate lie. This act of political disrespect remains one of the defining moments in the entire history of locker room manipulation. But that was not the end of it. In 2002, Hogan returned to WWE as a nostalgia act. The Undertaker was by this point the undisputed locker room leader. The two men were matched against each other again, this time for the championship at Judgment Day. During the match, the Undertaker went for his trademark chokeslam. A chokeslam requires cooperation. The person taking the move has to post up and provide elevation by jumping at the right moment. That jump makes the move look powerful. Without it, the whole thing falls apart. Hogan did not do that. Whether it was genuinely due to a bad back or a flat refusal to cooperate with a younger champion, Hogan stayed grounded. He gave nothing. The Undertaker was forced to deadlift a very large man from the mat with almost no assistance. The result was weak and unconvincing. The credibility of the match was damaged by it. There was also a moment on Raw where Hogan was unable to start a motorcycle during a televised segment. The Undertaker was standing right there, visibly struggling not to laugh at what was unfolding in front of him. Hogan lost the title at Judgment Day, but the damage was already done. The 1991 lie was active sabotage. He could a deliberate political act to protect one man's position at the direct cost of another's. The 2002 no-sell was passive-aggressive non-cooperation, a refusal to meet the professional standard expected of a main event performer. Together, they told the full story of Hulk Hogan's relationship with The Undertaker, built on imbalance, ego, and a consistent unwillingness to put the collective business before the personal brand. In a locker room that ran on memory and consequence, that was not the kind of history you wanted to carry. Number 5, Shawn Michaels. Before we get there, think about what the Hogan chapter actually cost the locker room. It planted a seed of mistrust. It showed every wrestler watching that political power could be used to undo a result within days. It showed that seniority could override override the plan. And it showed that even the most powerful judge in the locker room could not always protect a young talent from being used as a stepping stone by someone with more leverage. That was the locker room Shawn Michaels walked into. The late 1990s were the most volatile years in WWE history. The locker room was fractured, trust was nearly gone, and at the center of all of it was one man, Shawn Michaels. Michaels was the most talented performer in the world at that time. His ability in the ring was extraordinary. He could have a great match with almost anyone, but talent and professionalism are two entirely different things. And for a significant period of his career, Shawn Michaels had one without the other. He was the leader of a faction called the Clique, and the Clique had a well-earned reputation, known for backstage politics, for using influence to protect their own positions, for making life difficult for those they did not like, and for a dangerous willingness to refuse to do business when it suited them personally. Doing business in wrestling means losing when you are told to lose, following the plan, putting the needs of the company above your own pride. Shawn Michaels had been accused of refusing to do exactly that, and as WrestleMania 14 approached in 1998, the tension in the locker room was at its highest point in years. The story behind WrestleMania 14 starts with the Montreal Screwjob in November 1997. Bret Hart was deprived of the WWE Championship in a real-life betrayal that tore the locker room to pieces. Management had arranged for the match to end without Hart's knowledge or consent. The locker room never fully recovered from that night. So trust between talent and management was almost completely gone. Everyone was watching everyone else with suspicion. WrestleMania 14 was coming. The plan was for Michaels, who was now the champion, to lose to Stone Cold Steve Austin. This was not a minor decision. This was the future of the entire company. The Attitude Era was about to begin. Austin was the man who would lead it, and for that to happen, he needed to win the championship clean. But rumors spread that Michaels intended to refuse. He had a severe back injury. Some people believed he was going to use that as his reason to avoid making the loss. After Montreal, nothing felt guaranteed. The Undertaker saw what was coming, and he decided to act before it could happen. As Michaels prepared to walk through the curtain and into his match, he found the Undertaker already there. Wayne sitting in the gorilla position, the area directly behind the stage where wrestlers wait before their entrance. Wrapping his fists in athletic tape, slowly, methodically, strip by strip, he said nothing. He did not need to say a word. The message was completely clear. If Michaels came back through that curtain, still holding the championship, if he had refused to do business, the Undertaker was going to physically correct the situation himself. No court, no formal hearing. Just a man with taped fists and absolute resolve. Calloway was not doing this for personal reasons. He was doing it for every person in that building, every person watching at home, and every person whose livelihood depended on the company moving forward. The transition to Steve Austin's era was necessary for the survival of the business. The Undertaker was going to make sure it happened one way or another. Michaels went out and did business. He lost to Austin. The Attitude Era began. WWE went on to have the most profitable era in its history up to that point. But look at what it required. It required one man sitting in a corridor with taped fists, prepared to use physical force to make the company's future happen. That is not leadership through inspiration. That is leadership through intimidation. It was effective, but it was also an honest picture of how the hierarchy maintained itself. Not through conversation, through fear. Michaels made the right call that night. The business was protected, but the fact that it came to that point at all says something uncomfortable about the kind of order the Undertaker represented. Number 4, Chris Jericho. In this one is about a man who did not understand where he was. Chris Jericho came to WWE in 1999. He had come from WCW, where the backstage culture was far more chaotic and disorganized. The hierarchy there was less defined. The old codes were not always enforced. You could push boundaries and often get away with it. But when you walked through the door at WWE, you entered a different world entirely, and Jericho walked in without reading the room. He was confident, sharp, quick, and eager to establish himself in a hurry. He arrived with a character called Y2J and a personality that demanded immediate attention. And during his second appearance on national television, he made a mistake that would cost him months of progress. On the 16th of August, 1999, during a live episode of Raw, Jericho interrupted a promo by The Undertaker. Well, he was trying to be edgy. He was trying to build his Y2J character and signal to the audience that he was not afraid of anyone. He was trying to make his mark fast, so he called The Undertaker the personification of boredom. On paper, it was just a scripted promo line, designed to create a rivalry. But what Jericho did not understand was that certain lines cannot be crossed even inside a scripted moment. entertainment. Calling a top-level legend boring on live national television is one of them. The Undertaker was a draw. He had sold tickets for years. He had built his reputation through physical sacrifice and absolute commitment to the business. To call him boring publicly was to undermine his value in front of the entire audience. And that was not just an insult to one man. It was an insult to the entire structure that had given Jericho the platform he was standing on. The veterans in the locker room understood this straight away. Stone Cold Steve Austin pulled Jericho aside. Shawn Michaels pulled Jericho aside. They told him plainly that he had just committed professional suicide. A newcomer from a rival company had publicly mocked one of the pillars of the organization he had just joined. The backlash was immediate, and it did not let up. Jericho was blackballed. The locker room leaders stopped engaging with him. In the ring, he found himself on the receiving end of stiff work from wrestlers who were making their feelings known physically. His creative pitches were rejected. His ideas went nowhere. He was isolated, ignored, frozen out. This lasted for months. See, Jericho later spoke honestly about this period. He called himself a cowardly cartoon who did not understand the gravity of the industry's hierarchy. He admitted that he had arrived with a level of arrogance that was completely unearned, given his status in the company. He was not a veteran. He was not a proven commodity in WWE. He was a newcomer who had carried the habits of a less disciplined environment into a place that did not tolerate them. He had to change. He had to work harder. He had to prove through action and sustained effort that he understood and respected what the locker room stood for. And eventually, through that hard work and a genuine shift in attitude, he won back the respect of the veterans. But the lesson was painful, and it was designed to be. The Undertaker did not need to physically intervene in this case. The punishment was quieter than that. Closed doors, cold shoulders, creative silence, the system working exactly as the conscience had built it to work. Even without being in the room, his influence shaped what Jericho experienced every single day. In WWE, you were not free to mock the foundations of the brand without paying for it. Jericho paid that price. He went on to have a legendary career, but he earned it the hard way, which, as far as the locker room was concerned, was exactly as it should have been. Number 3, the Ultimate Warrior. This entry is different from the others. It is not about a lie. It is not about political, not about a lie. It is not about political games or a careless promo or a refusal to lose. This one is about something more dangerous than any of those things. This is about chaos meeting a world that runs on control. The Ultimate Warrior was a genuine phenomenon. The intensity was real. The crowd reaction was real. The energy he brought into every single entrance was unlike anything else in professional wrestling. Nobody ran down a ramp quite like him. Nobody connected with an audience through pure force of personality the way he did. But behind that spectacle, there was a serious problem. The Warrior was unpredictable. The structure that professional wrestling depends on was not something he always respected or even understood. And in 1991, that unpredictability created a situation that nearly killed him. The Undertaker and the Warrior were in a feud at the time. A segment was planned for the funeral parlor. The interview segment hosted by Paul Bearer. The idea was straightforward. And on The Undertaker and Paul Bearer would lure the Warrior into a casket and lock him inside. The segment was built to showcase the threat of the new Deadman character and create tension for the rivalry. The casket used for the segment was custom made. It had the right look for a supernatural storyline, but it was nearly airtight. The filming began. The Warrior was locked inside. The segment played out on camera, but as time went on, production staff and officials began to realize something was wrong. The Warrior was in distress. He was not getting enough air. The lock on the casket had jammed. He could not get out on his own. They tried everything available to them. Eventually, they were forced to use crowbars and power drills to break into the casket from the outside. Once they finally reached him, where the Warrior required medical resuscitation, he had to be brought back. Now, the technical failure of the casket was not the Warrior's fault. A malfunctioning prop is a production problem, but the incident became symbolic of something the locker room had already been feeling. It became the moment that captured everything the Undertaker believed about what it meant to work with someone who brought that kind of chaos into the business. In professional wrestling, trust is everything. When you are in that ring with another person, your safety is literally in their hands. They control the pace. They control the contact. They decide whether the night ends with everyone walking out on their own 2 feet. You have to be able to trust the person across from you completely and without hesitation. The Undertaker did not trust the Warrior. No, he viewed him as erratic, as someone who could not be relied upon to protect his opponent or maintain the careful pacing of a story being told inside the ring. The chaos that surrounded the Warrior was not just part of his character. It was a working style, and a working style built on chaos puts every single person around it at risk. Wrestlers who cannot be trusted to keep things safe are seen as the highest form of disrespect in the locker room, not because they intend harm, but because the physical risk they create is the same regardless of intent. intent. Careless and dangerous produced the same outcome. The Warriors' lack of professional discipline, as The Undertaker understood it, was a form of disrespect to the entire structure of the business. The structure that says you take care of your opponent, you protect the story, and you control the environment. Because if you do not, someone ends up inside a jammed casket running out of air while a crew scrambles for crowbars. In a world where trust is the currency of survival, that kind of unpredictability is not just frustrating. It is a threat to every performer who steps through the curtain and puts their body in someone else's hands. Number 2, Brock Lesnar. The Undertaker and Brock Lesnar share one of the most complicated relationships in the history of professional wrestling. It is not built on pure hatred. It is built on something stranger than that, on legitimate physical respect running alongside deep professional resentment, on two men who share an intensity and a power that very few human beings ever possess, but who hold completely different beliefs about what that power means and what it is owed to. Mal, for The Undertaker, the business was sacred. You gave everything to it. You kept coming back even when your body was asking you to stop. That loyalty was not just a career choice. It was part of his identity at the deepest level. Brock Lesnar left. After becoming one of the most dominant performers in WWE history, Lesnar walked away from professional wrestling to pursue a career in the UFC. He went from WWE champion to competing in a real cage for real consequences. And to The Undertaker, that departure was a signal, a clear statement that the business, which had made Lesnar a star, was not enough for him, that he was willing to walk away from it. The Undertaker viewed that as disrespect. In 2010, Lesnar lost the UFC Heavyweight Championship to Cain Velasquez at UFC 121. The Undertaker attended that event. He was watching. And after the fight, when Lesnar was being interviewed by Ariel Helwani, The Undertaker confronted him directly. He looked at Lesnar and said, "You want to do it?" 4 words in the middle of an MMA arena, a professional wrestling fight being picked in a venue built for real ones. The Undertaker admitted later that he had gone to that event specifically to pick a fight with Lesnar, to bring him back, to make him feel the pull of the business he had walked away from. Both were deliberate. It was The Undertaker's way of saying, "You owe this industry something. Come back and settle it." Lesnar eventually did return, and the rivalry that followed would produce the biggest single moment in WrestleMania history. WrestleMania 30, New Orleans, the streak. New. That we opened this video with that night because it defines everything that came before and after it. The Undertaker arrived carrying 21 wins. He had been asked by Vince McMahon to allow the streak to end. He had looked at the boss and said, "Are you sure?" And the answer had come back yes. So he did business. Early in the match, The Undertaker suffered a severe concussion. Within the first few minutes, the clarity he needed to perform at that level was gone. He has no memory of the night after 3:30 p.m. that afternoon. He fought on instinct. He survived through the match as best he could. Lesnar won. The streak ended. 21-0 became 21-1. The stunned silence of the crowd told the whole story. This was not a normal match result. It felt like something had broken that could never be repaired. And in a way, it had. Vince McMahon's decision was based on a belief that The Undertaker was finished, that this was his last match, that Lesnar was the only performer with the credentials to carry the weight of ending something that large. The question Vince had asked himself was simple. If not Brock, then who? And he had his answer. The Undertaker trusted that decision. He honored the commitment. He did business under a concussion with no memory of the final moments. But the aftermath added another layer. Paul Heyman, Lesnar's manager, later ran promos implying that Lesnar had stolen the streak, that he had gone into business for himself, that the ending was not clean in the way that endings in this world are supposed to be. Watch, these promos layered a story of disrespect over what had already been a deeply personal, physical sacrifice for The Undertaker. Lesnar was genuinely unhappy seeing The Undertaker hospitalized after the match. He had to carry a concussed opponent through the remainder of the bout without knowing the full extent of what was happening. This story is not entirely black and white. There is real physical respect between these two men, but underneath all of it sits the original act. Lesnar leaving a business that gave him everything, and The Undertaker being the one who felt the need to walk into a real fighting arena to demand he acknowledge what he had left behind. In the locker room, walking away is a form of disrespect, and The Undertaker never once forgot it. Number 1, CM Punk. This is the entry that crosses a line none of the others crossed. The others were about ego, about politics, about arrogance, carelessness, or physical recklessness. This one is about something that exists entirely outside of wrestling. This one is about grief, real human grief. Paul Bearer, born William Moody, was the manager of The Undertaker for the majority of his career. The character of Paul Bearer was iconic. The urn, the shriek, the pale look, and the unforgettable voice. He was as much a part of The Undertaker's image as the hat, the coat, and the slow walk to the ring. But beyond the character and beyond the gimmick, William Moody was a genuine close friend of Mark Calloway. Not a work relationship, a real one, built over years of time spent on the road together, in hotels, hotels and locker rooms, and through all the long days and nights that make up a life in professional wrestling. When Moody passed away in March 2013, it was a profound loss for Calloway, the kind of loss that does not go away when the cameras turn on. At the time, CM Punk was scheduled to face The Undertaker at WrestleMania 29. WWE Creative made a decision. They would use the real-life death of William Moody as fuel for the storyline. They would allow CM Punk to use the grief of The Undertaker and the memory of a real man to build heat for the match. Moody's family gave their approval, but written approval and what eventually appeared on screen are two very different things. The segment was broadcast on Raw. In the middle of what was framed as a tribute to Paul Bearer, CM Punk appeared. He stole the urn, and then, in the most confrontational moment of the entire angle, he poured what were supposed to be Bearer's ashes directly over The Undertaker. Michael Moody, William's son, later said publicly that what he saw on screen was a different story from what had been described to the family before they gave their approval. The visceral nature of the final televised segment landed differently than the pitch had. Seeing the act of desecration play out under the lights in front of a live audience was something else entirely. For Mark Calloway, this was a test unlike any other he had faced throughout his entire career in the locker room. Every other entry on this list involved a dispute that lived inside the world of the business, a fabricated injury, a no-sell, a thoughtless promo on live television, an unsafe working style, a complicated professional rivalry. All of those things, however painful, exist within the territory of professional wrestling. This one did not. This was his friend. Real grief being converted into content, a genuine personal loss being used as a vehicle for a villain's heat. And Calloway had to stand in the middle of that segment and allow it to happen. Because doing business means following the plan. You protect the story, even when the story asks something of you that goes beyond the ring. He did business. He honored the commitment. He performed. But Punk's willingness to fully inhabit that role, to stand in a tribute segment and pour fake ashes over a grieving man, was viewed by many inside and outside the locker room as the clearest example of modern disrespect the business had ever produced. Not because Punk created the angle himself, WWE Creative made that decision, but because he executed it without visible hesitation. He committed to the villain when the pain being used was entirely real. The match at WrestleMania 29 eventually delivered what it promised. The Undertaker won. He recovered the urn in the story. Many people who watched it felt that the match was, in its own way, a reclaiming of what had been taken, a final act of honor for William Moody, carried out in the only arena where The Undertaker knew how to honor someone. But the wound underneath it was not healed by a match result or a championship victory. What the CM Punk angle revealed, more than any other entry on this list, is where the outer boundary of the business actually sits. There is a line between using the drama of a rivalry and using the genuine grief of a real human being as a storyline device. That line is not always drawn clearly. In 2013, it was crossed, and The Undertaker was the one standing on the other side of it, doing business anyway. He did what he always did. He put the business first. He delivered. He performed. But he paid a price that none of the other 5 people on this list ever came close to paying, and that is why CM Punk is number 1. 6 names, 6 stories, 6 different ways that one man's authority was tested, questioned, and ultimately confirmed by the response it demanded. The locker room was rigid. It was brutal in ways that went beyond what was strictly necessary. It ran on hierarchy, and hierarchy by its nature protects those at the top while placing the burden on those who are still working their way up. Veterans could make life very difficult for younger talent simply because the system said they had earned the right to. And at the head of that system, recognized by everyone from the newest recruit to the top of management, sat The Undertaker. The one man even the boss was reportedly afraid to deliver bad news to. That is an extraordinary position for one performer to occupy. And it raises an honest question about where protection of the business ends and protection of the hierarchy begins. The answer is probably that The Undertaker himself would not have separated the two. To him, they were the same thing. And that is the complicated legacy of the conscience of WWE. He was not a villain. Nothing on this list makes him one. Every response he gave, from the taped fists at WrestleMania 14 to the cold institutional silence of the locker room, was rooted in a genuine belief that the business deserved to be protected with everything he had. He cared about professional wrestling in a way that could not be separated from who he was. The ring was not just a job to him, it was sacred. The codes were not just old habits. They were the structure that kept people safe and kept audiences trusting what they were watching. He proved that with his own body over 30 years. He performed through injuries that would have retired most people. He came back when his body asked him to stop. He did business even when it meant losing his undefeated streak. He did business even when it meant standing in a tribute segment for a friend who had just died. You cannot look at that record and say the man did not care, but you can say that the culture he built and enforced was not always a kind one, that the fear running through the locker room was not always a healthy form of discipline, and that some people who suffered under the system might have had a very different experience if there had been more room for conversation and less room for punishment. That tension is what makes the story of The Undertaker worth telling over and over again. He was the best version of the locker room judge, principled, consistent, and loyal to the business above all else. And he was also the most extreme version of it, absolute, intimidating, and prepared to back every decision with physical force if that was what it took. 6 people challenged that authority. 6 people found out in different ways and at different costs what that meant. Hulk Hogan and the politics, Shawn Michaels and the taped fists, Chris Jericho learning what hierarchy actually costs, the Ultimate Warrior and the chaos that followed him, Brock Lesnar and the end of the streak, CM Punk in an urn filled with something too real to be called just a wrestling angle. Every one of those moments was a test of the system, and every one of them in the end proved the same thing. The locker room was not a democracy, it was a hierarchy, and the man at the top of that hierarchy spent 30 years making sure that everyone who came through that curtain understood the difference between the two. His name was Mark Calloway. The audience knew him as The Undertaker. The locker room knew him as the conscience of the WWE, a man who turned a character into a real-world position that no one could take from him because no one else was willing to pay what he paid for it. The 6 people on this list all discovered what it cost to challenge that position. Some recovered and went on to have great careers. Some left marks on the locker room that the business never fully forgot, but every single one of them, at one point or another, had to reckon with a set of rules they did not create and could not simply walk away from. Those rules were not written down anywhere. They did not need to be. They lived in the cold silence of a locker room that had turned its back on you, in the stiff shot you felt in the ring when someone was making a point, in a man sitting at gorilla position, wrapping his fists one strip at a time, saying absolutely nothing at all. The rules were always enforced, every single night, without fail. And the ring, for as long as he stood watch over it, always remained sacred.